At 6 in the morning, the cul-de-sac looks like the surface of some frozen alien planet. Everything is white and silent except for the low rumble of my engine. I'm idling a dented sky blue Zamboni in front of my townhouse, mist pluming from the exhaust like dragon's breath as I buff a perfect oval into the packed snow where my car used to live. The machine hums beautifully, the blade scraping and smoothing with mechanical precision. Mara Yates, HOA president with a scarf wound tight around her neck like a viper ready to strike, comes sprinting across the street with a tape measure in one hand and a whistle clenched between her teeth. She's wearing a puffy coat that makes her look like an angry marshmallow. I raise one mittened hand in greeting, giving her my most innocent smile. Just resurfacing my reserved spot, Marla, I call out over the engine noise. She blows the whistle so hard a pigeon drops from a nearby birch tree, hitting the snow with a confused flutter. My name is GabeHolloway, but everyone calls me Gabe. I'm a quiet IT guy living in Birch Ridge Commons, a townhouse community where the homes are nice but the parking situation is a blood sport. I'm 34, single, and my idea of excitement is a new podcast episode and a good cup of coffee. I like thermal socks, predictable routines, and not talking to anyone before I've had my morning caffeine. Street parking here is like oxygen. We need it to survive because our garages are microscopic, barely big enough for a lawnmower, some storage boxes, and maybe a bicycle if you're really good at Tetris. Most people park one car in the driveway and one on the street. It's an unspoken system that worked perfectly fine for years. Everything was running smoothly until our HOA, led by Marla with an iron fist and too much free time, declared something called seasonal serenity. It was a complete ban on curbside parking from November 1st all the way through March 31st to maintain winter aesthetics, whatever that meant. The real translation? Her 23-year-old son just bought a brand new pickup truck that doesn't fit in their driveway, and she needed somewhere to put it. My little hatchback got orange tagged 3 times in 1 week. I moved it like a good neighbor, parking it around the block, but the snow immediately stole my space. Someone else's car appeared there within hours. That's when a late-night auction site showed me a retired ice rink Zamboni for $1,900, and the world's dumbest idea felt like destiny calling my name. Marla escalated like a weather alert, climbing from yellow to red to catastrophic. First came what she called courtesy notices, printed on official-looking letterhead she designed herself, for unsightly snow mounds where cars used to be parked. She left them tucked under everyone's doormats. Then she deputized 2 board members, Carol and Dennis, arming them with clipboards and those spiky shoe grips called yak tracks, to patrol the neighborhood at dawn like some kind of parking enforcement militia. They'd take photos and measurements, documenting every vehicle and snow pile like crime scene investigators. Marla planted homemade signs that said no parking, HOA ordinance on the public street, even though she had absolutely zero authority to do that. The signs looked official enough to fool most people, complete with fake ordinance numbers she'd invented. She started a Facebook group called Birch Ridge Beautification Committee and launched a crusade about vehicular blight, featuring zoomed-in photos of my bumper like it was some cryptid sighting on a paranormal investigation show. She posted daily updates about the scourge of cars and the cancer of clutter. I parked legally around the block just to avoid the drama, walking an extra 200 feet to my front door through the snow. A neighbor who was equally fed up with Marla, a retired teacher named Mr. Chen, shoveled my old spot into an impressive snow fortress complete with walls and turrets. So I rolled out the Zamboni, named her Blanch after my grandmother who never took nonsense from anyone, and began grooming one pristine, glare ice rectangle in front of my townhouse every single morning at 6. My neighbors loved it. Kids started skating on it after school with their hockey sticks. One family brought hot chocolate. Marla's left eyelid developed a twitch like a metronome stuck on Allegro, and she started wearing sunglasses even on cloudy days to hide it. Marla called everyone she could think of, leaving frantic voicemails and sending desperate emails. The police, who told her it was a civil matter. City parking enforcement, who explained they don't handle HOA disputes. And for some bizarre reason that nobody could explain, the Department of Fish and Wildlife. She told them I was operating heavy industrial equipment without a permit and creating an ice hazard designed to trap vehicles, like some kind of Bond villain with a municipal budget and a vendetta. She used phrases like public safety threat and reckless endangerment. City parking showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, looked around the street, shrugged, and pointed to the ordinance book. Public streets fall under city jurisdiction, not HOA rules, the officer explained slowly, like he was talking to a child. "Ma'am, your organization can regulate driveways and private property, but not the curb." Then the Department of Public Works guy, a man named Rick with a thick Boston accent, noticed something interesting while he was checking on a separate water main issue. Marla's official-looking signs weren't city-issued, which was illegal, and she'd staked 2 of them directly into the hell strip, that narrow strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street that belongs to the city. In doing so, she'd punched holes right through a waterline marker, one of those little green flags that tells workers where the pipes are buried. He got on his radio and called for a supervisor, his tone shifting from curious to serious. Marla doubled down hard, refusing to back down, and filed what she called an emergency injunction through the HOA attorney. This lawyer turned out to be her cousin Derek, working remotely from a Panera Bread with a Bluetooth earpiece permanently attached to his head and a law degree from a school nobody had heard of. A real city inspector arrived the next morning with snow still clinging to his thick mustache and a no-nonsense attitude. His name was Martinez, and he'd been doing code enforcement for 20 years. He asked pointed questions in a calm, methodical voice. Who installed the illegal signs without permits? Who had been salting the street into what was essentially a skating rink? That one was me, guilty as charged, but I'd done it artfully and only on my little rectangle. And who had been circulating fines that were payable via personal Venmo accounts? He held up a printout of one of Marla's fake violation notices with her Venmo handle, Yates for Beauty, listed at the bottom as the payment method. While Marla recited an entire paragraph from the HOA bylaws about harmonious vistas and community standards and the sacred duty of preserving neighborhood character, the inspector calmly read from the actual municipal code, the real laws that matter. HOAs cannot regulate public streets under any circumstances, he stated. It's state law. Tampering with city utility markers is a finable offense of $500 per marker. And unpermitted signage on public property carries a penalty of $50 for each day it remains in place. He turned to me and asked about the Zamboni, looking at it with something close to amusement. Technically, he said, pulling out a vehicle classification guide, it's a slow-moving maintenance device. Like a riding lawnmower, he added, flipping through pages. But much dumber and significantly funnier. Proceed with caution, he told me with the faintest hint of a smile, and try not to make the ice too slippery. He actually winked. Marla attempted one final stand, her last desperate move to maintain control. She decided to stage what she called a citizens' blockade, announcing it on the Facebook group with a call for supporters. Only she showed up. She planted herself directly in my freshly polished ice rectangle at 5:45 the next morning to save the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. She stood there with her arms crossed and her whistle ready, wearing snow boots that had absolutely no traction. I came out at 6 as usual, fired up Blanch, and eased her forward at a noble 3 miles per hour as the entire block pulled out their phones to film. Someone was definitely live streaming it. She started yelling about citizens' arrests and trespassing, neither of which applied. She tried to hop aside at the last second, probably realizing this wasn't going to work, but lost all traction on the mirror finish ice I'd created. What followed was a slow-motion banana peel pirouette that would have made a slapstick comedian proud. She windmilled her arms, spun a full 360 degrees, and ended up seated, completely unhurt but thoroughly humiliated, sliding gently down the sloped cul-de-sac with her whistle wheezing like a sad kazoo. She slid for a good 15 feet before coming to a stop against a snow bank. The city inspector Martinez, who had returned to document the illegal signs for his report, photographed every single one. The Department of Public Works flagged the damaged waterline marker with official orange tape. 2 police officers who had been watching the whole spectacle from their patrol car, probably waiting to see how it played out, issued Marla citations for unlawful signage, interference with city operations, and harassment. The HOA's so-called emergency injunction died in a pile of Panera crumbs when her cousin attorney Derek failed to show up to the hearing, claiming he'd never actually filed the paperwork. The best part? The Birch Ridge youth hockey coach, a woman named Sandra, messaged me that evening asking if I could bring Blanch to their community rink fundraiser on Saturday. I said absolutely, I'd be honored. I parked the Zamboni right in my newly liberated curb spot, put a bright orange cone on top of it like a crown, and went to work feeling better than I had in months. 3 weeks later, the city sent the HOA a bill for marker repairs and all the accumulated fines from the illegal signage. The total came to $4,700. The board held an emergency special meeting at the community center, and every resident showed up. The room was packed. The residents voted Marla out by a margin of 32-3. The only 3 votes in her favor were her own, her husband's, and Carol from the parking patrol who still believed in the cause. Marla stood there in shocked silence, her face turning the color of a fire hydrant, her mouth opening and closing without sound. When the vote was announced, she grabbed the podium and demanded a recount, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. The city also assigned her 60 hours of community service with the Department of Public Works, which meant supervised snow shoveling on public sidewalks while wearing a bright yellow reflective vest that said Aesthetics Team in huge black letters across the back. She tried to argue, tried to appeal, threatened to sue everyone in the room, but the citations were ironclad. Inspector Martinez had documented everything perfectly. As she stormed out of that meeting, knocking over a folding chair, she turned back one last time with tears of fury in her eyes and said in a shaking voice that everyone would regret this, that she'd made this neighborhood what it was. But nobody responded. Her reign of petty tyranny was over, ended by a $1,900 Zamboni and her own inability to understand the difference between HOA bylaws and actual laws.